If you guys don't know, Mel Mel has 2 kids, and that's his baby mama right there. She's evil. She's really not evil, but just look at that face though. What's going on, guys? So it's been 2 days now since the last clip, and yesterday I just running around, came back. It was getting dark, and I actually spent more time cleaning all of the parts for the ITR block, like the rear main seal cover, the water pipe, thermostat housing, nice and clean. And I also scrubbed down the piston with purple power as well as warm water. I got the old rings removed off all of the pistons, and the top of the pistons cleaned to the best of the toothbrush ability. And I also like DIY polished the crank. And this is actually the other ITR crank that I'm going to be using for the block. And you can see how much more cleaner they are, right? So I thought about it today, guys. I'm going to assemble the rotating assembly on the short block. We're going to file the rings down if we have to, and then we're going to clearance the crank. If everything looks good on the crank, then we'll remove the caps, lubricate it, put it back in, torque it down, and then we'll press the piston and rods in, and then we're going to clearance the rods, make sure that those are within spec, and then remove those, lubricate it, torque it down again, and that'll be pretty much it for the rotating assembly. Because we don't have an oil pump, so we can't install that, but maybe whatever else we have for the short block, we'll install it today as well too. Alright guys, so first thing I did here was fix that light bulb, because I only had one. Now I got 2. So right here on my table we have the rotating assembly components, and we have our ITR crank, we have the ITR pistons, and the rods. The one that we replace is right here, and we have the tool to compress the ring to put these piston and rod into the cylinder. This is made by ARP. No winding and twining necessary, and I believe Y&S offer the same thing. And then we have assembly lube. We got my cousin's green. We got this red one from Permatex. ATF to clean the cylinders out, and then wipe dry before dabbing oil, putting these pistons in. Piston ring pliers. We have King bearings, standard spec, main, rod, and thrust washers. We have plastic gauge because I'm not a professional engine builder. I don't have all them crazy fancy tools. MPR rings, the one that is the best spec out of the 3 kit that I got. We have our brand new torque wrench and the ring filer right here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna file my rings down right now, and I'm gonna recheck them again. I'm also gonna check the oiling ring because I didn't check any of those in any other videos, but you want to make sure that they're at least 15 thou minimum. So we're gonna redo all these piston rings and make sure that they're within spec, and if they're not, we're gonna file them down. First set I'm gonna do is top rings, which is labeled first here on the bag. Take note that the rings itself has the letter N for the NPR set. Other set has dots or hyphen or different indication to let you know that the side with the marking is supposed to be pointing up, and I think the N means north, north means up, so N is pointing up. As I mentioned before, my pistons are 1101 dome, so I can't use the piston to press these rings flat. So what I did was I used my digital caliper to gauge it down to about 1.5 inches, and I'm using this end right here to ensure my rings are 1.5 inches equally down the cylinder and all of them. So now I'm gonna check my ring gaps. I'm gonna throw this chart back here on the screen, and then it says top ring minimum is 0.8 thousandths of an inch, so maximum is 0.014, and service limits is 0.024. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my 14 thou feeler gauge right off the bat, because I've checked this before, and cylinder 1 is a snug, like I can feel it dragging on 14. Number 2, a little loose. Number 3 is a loose 14. Number 4 is a snug 14. So I believe 2 and 3 might be a 15, which is past specification, but not to service limits. Okay, so we're dragging on 15, and we're dragging on 15, so 14, 15, 15, 14. Damn, this is a little different than the last time I measured it. I think those specs are a little too much for me, but I do have 2 more sets of NPR rings, and I believe this is like 14 and 13, which is, you know, a little bit better than the last set, but we'll see. If this is better than what we just measured, we'll just use this set instead. Cylinder 1, snug 14. A little drag on 14 cylinder 2. Snugged 14 cylinder 3. And snug 14 on cylinder 4. These are the rings I am using. So this, cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll show you guys right here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 with the measurements that we just did. And let's move on to the second rings. So now we're gonna gap second rings, and on the back it says second on here, so you can't mess that up. And also you can't mix these up with the tops, because on one side of the rings it has a little taper for scraping oil down, and also labeled N and top. So spec sheet back on the screen here. Piston ring gap for second rings are 16 to 22,000, and service limits is 28. So right here I have a 16 minimum, and see where this ring gap is at. So if you look at it, that is a tight 16 minimum, and cylinder 1 is good. That's a snug 16 as well too. Look at that. Snug is when you feel it dragging. That's snug. Cylinder 3, where are we at? It's also a snug 16. That's freaking awesome. And then cylinder 4. Cylinder 4 is a little looser. So let's go to 17. That is a 17. So second rings are within specification. That's freaking awesome. Man, these oil control bastards are tricky to get in because they're so thin, but minimum reading is 15 thou, and I've heard that these you don't really need to check them, but it doesn't hurt to make sure. So 15 goes in 2, 3, 4 right there. I don't know if you guys can see that. 4 and 1 obviously. So oil control rings are done. I already did that set right there, and these set they're all 15, so it doesn't matter which cylinder, you know, I mix them up into, they're all the same. I cleaned the pistons yesterday, so I gotta re-lubricate the wrist pin, get some oil in there beforehand. Make sure they spin freely. All these little grooves, I've already cleaned them out yesterday, so they're nice and clean for installation of the rings. So I labeled the rods when I took it out of the block. I want to keep it in the same order, other than number, I believe it's number 3 is the one that we replaced, so it has no number on it, but all the other ones are. And the first rings we're going to put on, I'm not going to clock them yet because I'm not putting them into the cylinder, and I have to do a little bit of research to ensure that the clocking of the ring is correct, because everybody does them differently, which makes me confused. But so this is rod number 1, and I'm going to be using all of the rings that came from cylinder 1. And the first one we're going to do is the oil control rings, and I noticed that this is a lot different than the other NPR sets. So this has like a little like wire in like the middle of it, so when you pull these apart, it doesn't actually separate. These rings are thin enough that you can install without the plier, and just take note that you still have to be very careful because they can break. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this guy on like so. So here's a top control ring that I'm gonna go ahead and gently install. This one sits on top of that brass ring right there, and then the bottom one I'm gonna slide in from the rod side, just like that. Again, I'm not gonna clock these rings into place yet until we put it into the cylinder, so I'm just gonna set them all onto the piston. Next, we're gonna do the second rings, and again, scraper on the second ring. I don't know if you guys can see that little taper lip. and then it also has the N, which is north. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a snap ring plier for this, because this is a little thicker and you can't spread this too much, because then you'll break it. Ask me how I know. One of these little guys right here, specifically for snap rings, and pretty much this opening right here, put it in, pry it really slowly. You just need it to open enough that it goes over the piston, right? Drag it all the way down to the second grooves, and just like that, we have our rings installed. Last ring going on, first ring, top ring, also with the N on the top, and same process. Use a snap ring plier, open it enough that it slides over the piston, and it just goes right into place, just like that. First and foremost, you got to make sure all of the journals, everything inside of here is lint free, super clean, nice and dry, at least for the bearing portion of the journal. But got to install my oil squirters before I do the crank stuff, because once the crank is in place, you can't get those in there, or it'd be harder to do it. There's no way to get these guys installed wrong, because there is this little dowel right here, and it seats into the slot that it's supposed to go in. So I'll go ahead and install these guys. These little oil squirters, they're 10 mil and they are 12 foot-pounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the main bearings and plastic gauge them to the crank, just to ensure that we're within specs. And again, using a old 100% cotton shirt, which doesn't have the lint anymore, because you know it's been used a million times. But this came from my old job, where we order like 20-pound, 100-pound piles of shirt, which are 100% cotton and super clean. So the whole key to this build, or any build, is cleanliness. I am using King standard bearings, and these out of the bag has this like coating on it, so it's important that you clean them up, make sure they aren't like, you know, all grimy and stuff. This one I already cleaned, but I'm gonna clean them again. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to wipe it off, but I did. So shout out to Franklin for these bearings. If you guys want to go back to the ultimate like care package unboxing video, Franklin sent me all of these bearings for a future rebuild, and it came in super clutch. So we got bearings, and now it's time to clean bottom side, journal side, and we're going to install these one by one. Again, these are specific. Tangs offset it. You'll know when you get to doing it yourself. Make sure it's seated nicely. Now we're going to do the thrust washers, which sits in the cylinder between 3 and 4 right here. I'm using ACL. Big shout out to Geith for this, because I forgot to order it, and while I was in the shop, he was like, I ordered these in bulks, so here's a set. And this also came in clutch. When you're installing these guys right here, you're doing the flattest part of the bearing, right? There's two sides to this, and the flatter side goes on the block. These ones with the slashes in them points out, and there's only two of these guys. To help these stick into place, and use some assembly lube and just dab across this whole thing, and it should just hold itself up against the block. Dab it like that. These assembly lubes are very sticky, so that's really like what's helping it stick into place, just like that. Make sure they're nice and flat and flush. So what I'm doing right now is I am lubricating the bearings, just in case we get the crank into specification with the plastic gauge. We don't have to remove the crank to do this. Instead, it's already there, and then we can just torque it back down after cleaning the plastic gauge off the crank, and then we could pretty much move forward towards the rods. Now, a lot of lubrication does not hurt. It gives it a lot of you know, lubrication for when the engine starts, before the oil prime. But obviously, when you do this, you want to make sure your oil prime before, you know, turning the car on. I think I might have added too much, but before you install your crank, make sure all your journals are nice and clean. Install with cautions, because you don't want to scratch the journals up. So that's that. So how I'm going to check my clearances, I'm going to be using a plastic gauge. Be sure to get the one in inches, and sometimes these come with like one side red, one side green, or sometimes they come both green, sometimes they come both red. We're using the green, and all you pretty much do is, obviously there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 extra, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 pieces you can cut off of this one plastic gauge set. And all I'm pretty much going to do is I'm going to cut it about there, and then inside there's like a little clay, right? I'll show you guys in a second. And you place this as straight as you can at the very top of each journal before the crank caps, and then torque it down. It should smush and then give you a reading where you can use this little gauge to gauge the thickness between the journal, the bearing, and the crank caps. This little clay thing right here, really small. I'm gonna go ahead and start over here with 4. I'm gonna go ahead and bolt the cap on it so it stays in place. This one right here is number 5, which is towards the transmission, arrow towards the crank. And I'm just gonna put it there to ensure that little clay is not gonna run away. No assembly lubes on the bearing for this process. Also ensure your tangs on the girdle, if you're running a GSR Type R block, is facing the exhaust side. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these all driven down real quick. I was waiting for my battery to charge for my camera so I can show you guys this, and it was also raining pretty loud. So the crank bolts, they have 2 different torque specs, because the girdle, and I believe these top ones are 49 and then the outsides are 56. I just went through all of them with 20, the first set of torque spec. I just threw them at 20, just kind of halfway between the actual spec. And right now we have the torque wrench at 49 for the girdle. I'm gonna go ahead and just knock these out real quick. And now the outside, I'm gonna turn it up to 56. It's very important to not move the crank. If you guys want to pick up a long t-shirt like this, be sure to hit up builttodrive.bigcartel.com. Why build it if you can't drive it? I don't know, Dana. Why don't your car run? I don't know. Cool. Now, what we got to do is we got to remove all of the main caps. I'm going to take it out in the order I torqued them in. And the plastic gauge should be squished. Again, very important to not move the crank. And then we're going to measure it. This one got stuck to the damn main bearing cap than it did on the journal itself. Now, because they still squished, not sure if my surface to the journal wasn't like fully, how do you say it? Fully dry, but at least we can still measure this. So I just looked at this little like paper. It actually is inch on one side and then millimeter on the other side. So we're going to be using inch, and I think we're going to target like 0015 to 002. And I'll show you guys here real quick. This one we're at 00, a little bigger than 002. This one right here, 002. This one right here, 0015. On the one closest to the crank, 0015. The one closest to the flywheel, a smudge under 0015. So I think we're within specification. I think the middle one is supposed to be like a 2. I think these guys as well. I'm not sure. I'll put it up on the screen, but I believe we are in spec, and that means now we can clean the plastic gauge off both main caps and journal. I saw online that somebody was using a card to scrape off the plastic gauge, because this thing is a little biatch, but you just lightly just scrape it off, right? And then once they all come off like so, right? Don't be an idiot and do this over my crank. But once you get it off, just wipe the bearings nice and clean, lubricate it, repeat the process, torque it down. Ooh, nice and smooth, baby. Nice and smooth. Look at this. Okay guys, so I spent some more time trying to figure out ring orientation. I'm just gonna go by the Helms manual, and I have the diagram for that. I'm gonna show you how I am gonna be clocking the rings. But first, before we do that, I'm gonna go ahead and install all the bearings for the rods. Very important to keep these in their order, because you cannot mix these caps because of clearance reasons, and if you mix them up, you could potentially have like a tighter gap where the crank is going to be super hard to rotate. But I kept these in order, so hopefully I don't have that issue. Make sure the journals are really clean, right, because we are installing this dry. And again, tangs are on the exhaust side, right? So here's one mistake I did. You got one tang here, and then one tang here, right there. They're supposed to be on the same side. What I did was I took a rag, right, and I used automatic transmission fluid, kind of went through it real quick to clean out the cylinder, because automatic transmission fluid has additives. And then I cleaned the cylinder of the ATF, and you know, before we install the piston and rod into the block, we're gonna oil it down a little bit. Hunter Tune says he doesn't use oil in the cylinder and he has no issues, but just precautionary reasons, I'm gonna do it anyways. My ring orientation is gonna be according to the Helms manual, and I found a diagram online, which is the same one my tuner sent me, which is the same one that Simon sent me. So I'm gonna throw that on the screen here. So I set the rings according to the diagram, and I sent it to Jeremy, and he approves of it. So what I'm doing here is intake, and the smaller valve relief is the exhaust. So I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this, but the top ring, I'm going to line up that edge to this edge here, like so. And then the second ring, I'm going to line up this edge to this line right here, right? So that's first and second ring. Now I'm going to turn it over, right? And then the oil control rings, I'm going to have the top oil control ring, which is this slit right here. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'm going to have that kind of like on the skirt of this one. Use a little pick to turn it, right? And then I'm gonna turn the bottom control ring probably like an inch away from this guy, but not center line to this center. Hopefully I got this right according to the diagram. And then the center, the brass, you can see the pattern, thick, skinny, thick. That's where it separates, and I put this in between these two oil rings here. So hopefully that's gonna work out for me. And if it's not, it's a learning lesson, so I'm not really worried about it. But I'm gonna go ahead and do this to all the pistons, and then we'll get to installing this into the block. Again, I ran ATF through here, and then I wiped the ATF down. I'm gonna go ahead and just dab a little bit of oil on the cylinder walls, so that way the ring's gonna be you know, moving up and down the cylinder freely. It's really not a big deal, but like I said, I'm gonna do it anyways. Yes, I am using my finger, but so again, what I'm using here is an ARP unit. Wiseco offers the same thing. This is the piston ring compressor tool without having to crank it. Lubricating this a little bit to make it easier. Make sure the skirt is sticking out a little bit at the bottom here, because that's going to align the piston into the cylinder. I got a little rag on the journal because I don't have the sleeve. Probably going to have to order me some of that. But go ahead and carefully place this into the cylinder. Make sure your IN is on the intake side, right? Make sure the piston itself is somewhat straight in line with the crank, so you don't have to like twist it too much inside of the cylinder. So once you're feeling good, pressurize the sleeve and then push the piston in. Pretty simple, no mallet. Just like that. Double check number 4. Straight as can be. Voila. So right now I'm going to push this all the way down and make sure that it's not going to hit the crank journal. So now we're going to check rod clearances, and it's the same process as the crank. Put the plastic gauge in there, make sure your journals are nice and dry, so that way they don't come off with the cap. I'm going to shoot for like 15 in the middle, but anywhere in between that is within specification, so we should be alright. Jeez, my hand is too big for this damn clay. Tangs on the exhaust. Tangs on the exhaust. Drive them in. OEM spec is 14 pounds first, and second torque is 33 foot-pounds for B18C 1. So I'm gonna do 14 and then 33. First one is 14, and if you guys take note, I'm torquing towards like the flywheel, right, which gives me less chance of rotating the crank while doing this. And I'm gonna try to hold the crank while doing it so we don't move and distort the plastic gauge. 33. Now removal. Inches, we are exactly 15 thou. This is exactly 15 thou. 15 thou. Well, you guys can't even see that. And then over here, same thing. 15 thou. So now that I've gotten this all cleaned out, I'm gonna go ahead and push these pistons back down a little bit. Push it down enough that I could rotate the rod to clear the journal, so I have full access to the bearings to lubricate them. Clear shot. Push them back up. Lubricate your bearings. Lubricate your rod caps. Give it a nice spread. Tangs on the exhaust side. So this whole time I thought I was recording, but I wasn't recording. Torque down first sequence 14 pounds and then 33 on the second one. I double clicked it to make sure I clicked it on 33, and then rotate the assembly. See how easy it rotates, no bindage, nothing whatsoever. This is definitely not more than 10 pounds of force to rotate this assembly. So now we're gonna move to cylinder 2 and 3. I'm gonna go ahead and position the journals at the bottom dead center with the engine the other way, so that way the rod bolts doesn't hit the journal. So go ahead and check orientation for the rings again for cylinder number 2. So GSR, ITR, or anything with a girdle, you're going to have to do 2 and 4, kind of offset it, because the girdle is in a way to torque your rod bolts down, and also try to set the plastic gauge in place. I'm going to go ahead and just skip over to our readings for 2 and 3. 15 thou. I don't know if you guys can see that. 15,000. Rod number 3 is 15 thou. I don't know if you guys can see that either. Too shiny. 15 thou. So that means we're in spec. Check the crank here real quick. 15 thou. A little under. Smudge under 15 thou. Probably do 15. Probably 14 or something. This one dead on 15. Sorry I can't show you guys this any closer. I'm fat. Again, I'm gonna clean all this, I'm gonna torque it down, and guys, that's pretty much gonna be the complete rotating assembly. So I'm pretty excited, and I hope you guys are too. Not a lot of effort to turn this. Everything is torqued down to specs. Every journal was plastic gauged, and the rings didn't really need to be filed because they are within specs out of the box, or mismatched out of the box. But guys, this is my first engine rebuild, and I'm not going to install all the other little accessories because it's all easy stuff, but our rotating assembly, guys, is done. Really smooth, other than the other. Gotta clean that piston a little bit. I just used a toothbrush. I didn't have anything to get all that carbon composite off. I'm happy. It's freaking awesome. If you guys saw something I might have missed or something I did wrong, be sure to leave a comment below and let me know. This engine is probably not going to go in for a little while, so I can always tear it back down and address it. But as far as everything went today, the reason why it took so long, it's like 9 o'clock right now, is because while I was doing a certain step, I was doing my research off camera as well to ensure that I was going to do it right and everything was going to be in the correct spec. So like I said, if you guys saw something I might have missed, let me know. So I am going to end the video right here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Found a local machinist, and I'm going to take apart my CSS block right there and bring the block in to try to get cylinder 1 honed out a little bit. And if that works out, we're going to start tearing the motor out of the CRX so we can start transferring the guts out of there into that one and hopefully get the CRX up and going again. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and stay posted for that. I'm itching to start working on the wagon again. All the all-wheel drive stuff is just chilling there waiting, so I hope you guys are looking forward to that one as well. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.